The majority controlling interest of Blackwell Industries will transfer to Vanessa, effective immediately, my father's attorney announced, his voice echoing through the cavernous conference room. I sat frozen, the words striking like physical blows while my sister's smile grew wider with each passing second. In that moment, as 20 years of my work evaporated with a single sentence, I had no idea that my grandmother had been plotting from beyond the grave to right this wrong, or that her final chess move would turn our entire family upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The glossy mahogany table stretched between us like a chasm. My sister, Vanessa on one side surrounded by her entourage of lawyers and assistants, and me, Eliza Blackwell, sitting alone on the other. Dad's death 3 weeks ago had hit us all hard, but business at Blackwell Industries couldn't wait for grief. The succession plan, however, was apparently waiting just for this moment. Furthermore, continued Mr. Patterson, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, Daniel Blackwell has stipulated that Vanessa Blackwell Hayes will assume the role of CEO and chairperson with comprehensive decision-making authority over all company operations, subsidiaries, and international holdings. I maintained my composure, years of boardroom battles having trained me well. My hands remained steady in my lap while I watched Vanessa's perfectly manicured fingers tap triumphantly against her leather portfolio. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dad's gift. To her, after she married the son of his oldest friend and business partner. Another reminder of the family hierarchy I'd never quite managed to climb. At 36, I was witnessing the culmination of years of subtle favoritism crystallized into legal documentation. Despite my MBA from Wharton, despite spearheading our international expansion that doubled company revenue, despite sacrificing any semblance of a personal life for Blackwell Industries, it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The family residence at 47 Lakeshore Drive and the vacation properties in Aspen and the Cayman Islands will also transfer to Vanessa Blackwell Hayes, Patterson continued, not meeting my eyes. The investment portfolios managed by Sinclair Partners will likewise be consolidated under her control. Vanessa glanced at me, her expression a practiced blend of sympathy and satisfaction. She had dressed for the occasion, a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than some employees made in a month, hairstyled in a sleek chignon, makeup flawless, every inch the corporate successor my father had groomed. I, on the other hand, was the family disappointment. Not because I lacked ambition or talent, but because I had committed the unforgivable sin of questioning my father's methods. I had pushed for sustainable manufacturing practices when he insisted they were too expensive. I had advocated for better employee benefits when he said it would eat into shareholder profits. I had refused to lay off our domestic workforce when he wanted to outsource everything to cut costs. My greatest transgression, however, was walking away from the merger marriage he'd orchestrated with the Harrington family 3 years ago. Bradley Harrington would have brought his family's shipping empire into our fold, exactly as Vanessa had done with her husband's family connections. But I couldn't marry a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenient business transaction. For Eliza, Patterson cleared his throat, his discomfort finally showing through his professional veneer. Your father has allocated the historical archive of company records and the personal effects from his home office. He paused, as if expecting an outburst. There is also a monthly stipend of $5,000 to be paid from the family trust, with the contingency that you provide consulting services to Blackwell Industries when requested by the CEO. A consulting fee. That's what 20 years of 70-hour work weeks had earned me. A pat on the head and a nominal consulting fee to advise the sister who had spent more time planning corporate galas than learning how international shipping regulations worked. The room fell into uncomfortable silence, all eyes shifting between Vanessa and me, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I had survived boardroom ambushes and hostile negotiations across 3 continents. This was just another battlefield. "Is there anything else, Mr. Patterson?" I asked, my voice steady and professional. "No, that concludes the formal reading," he replied, seemingly relieved by my composure. "Unless there are questions?" Vanessa leaned forward, her smile blindingly white. "I think we should discuss transition protocols, Eliza. I'd love your insights on the European operations before you." "Step back." Her voice dripped with false consideration. The subtle emphasis on step back, making it clear this was a demotion, not a gentle retirement. "Of course," I said, gathering my notes. "My assistant will coordinate with yours to transfer all pending projects." I stood, smoothing my navy pantsuit. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a manufacturing crisis in Singapore that needs attention." "Oh, don't worry about that anymore," Vanessa laughed lightly, waving her hand as if brushing away a fly. "I'm putting Julian in charge of Asia Pacific. He has such innovative ideas for restructuring." Julian, her husband's college roommate who had never once set foot in any of our facilities outside North America. I nodded curtly and headed for the door, feeling the weight of 2 decades of dedication crumbling behind me with each step. "Eliza?" Vanessa called as I reached the threshold. I paused without turning. "Don't forget the charity gala next weekend. The board will be there, and it would look strange if you weren't. We're still family after all." Family. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. I offered a non-committal nod and continued walking, my heels clicking against the marble flooring of the headquarters I had helped design. My executive assistant, Margaret, fell into step beside me as I emerged into the corridor. She had been with me for 15 years, since she was fresh out of college and I was just beginning to climb the corporate ladder. "That bad?" she asked quietly, already knowing the answer. "Worse," I replied, maintaining my pace toward my office, or what had been my office until approximately 10 minutes ago. "Vanessa gets everything, the company, the houses, the portfolios. I get Dad's paperweights and a consulting fee." Margaret's step faltered. "That's not possible. You built the European division from scratch. The board respects you more than the board respects money and power, Margaret, and as of this morning, Vanessa has both." I stopped at my office door, the nameplate still reading, "Eliza Blackwell, Executive Vice President of Global Operations." "We need to start transferring files. Priority projects first, then the confidential client list." Margaret hesitated. "And what about you? What's your plan?" For the first time since the reading began, I felt my careful composure threatening to crack. What was my plan? I had never planned for this contingency. Despite my father's obvious favoritism, I had always believed that merit would ultimately prevail, that the board would recognize who actually kept this company running while Vanessa hosted parties and cultivated social connections. "I don't know yet," I admitted quietly, then straightened my shoulders. "But first, we handle the transition professionally. We have people counting on us." Inside my office, I closed the door and allowed myself 30 seconds of pure, unfiltered rage. 30 seconds to feel the betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer injustice of it all. Then I took a deep breath, compartmentalized those feelings into a mental box labeled later, and got to work. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of transition, documents, project handovers, and brief, painful conversations with my direct reports. By 7 in the evening, my office was half-packed, the essential elements of my professional life condensed into 3 cardboard boxes. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Dinner tonight? We should discuss the Shanghai contract." 8 p.m. at Marcello's. I didn't respond. The Shanghai contract had been my negotiation, my sleepless nights, my careful relationship building with government officials who didn't trust Americans. And now Vanessa wanted me to hand her the playbook over osso buco and overpriced wine. Instead, I finished packing what I could, instructed Margaret to handle the rest tomorrow, and drove to the one place that still felt like mine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The small, lakeside cottage I had purchased 5 years ago against my father's explicit advice. "Real estate is for families, Eliza," he had said dismissively. "Focus on your career first." The irony wasn't lost on me that the only substantial asset I owned outright was the one thing I'd bought in direct defiance of my father's wishes. The cottage sat nestled among pine trees on the northern shore of Lake Serenity, about an hour outside the city. It wasn't large or particularly impressive, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room with a stone fireplace, and a deck overlooking the water. But it was mine, paid for with the bonuses I'd earned turning around failing international divisions. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, the last rays of sunset cast long shadows across the property. Inside, the cottage welcomed me with silence. No ringing phones, no urgent emails, no corporate politics. Just the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift to my grandparents over 60 years ago. My grandmother, Eliza Blackwell, had been the one to insist. I keep it when they sold their home to move into assisted living. "This clock has witnessed 4 generations of Blackwell women making difficult choices," she had told me. "It keeps perfect time, even when the world around it doesn't." Grandma Eleanor had been different from the rest of the Blackwell clan. Less concerned with appearances, more interested in substance. She had died just 7 months ago, leaving a hole in my life that made my father's recent passing feel more like the loss of a boss than a parent. I poured myself a generous glass of scotch, Dad's drink of choice, ironically, and settled. Onto the window seat overlooking the lake. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Vanessa. "Seriously, Eliza, we need to discuss transition plans. Dad would have wanted a smooth handover." I turned off my phone and took a long sip of scotch, letting the burn in my throat distract from the hollow feeling in my chest. Dad would have wanted what Dad always wanted. Things done his way, according to his vision, regardless of who got hurt in the process. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. It was nearly 9, and few people knew about this place. For a brief, irrational moment, I wondered if Vanessa had tracked me down to demand the Shanghai contract details in person. But when I opened the door, I found Walter Gibson, my grandmother's attorney, standing on my porch. Walter was in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and penetrating blue eyes that had intimidated courtroom opponents for decades. He had retired from his major firm years ago, but had kept my grandmother as his sole remaining client out of friendship and respect. "Walter," I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" He smiled kindly. "May I come in, Eliza? I've been trying to reach you all day, but your office said you were unavailable." I stepped aside to let him enter, noticing, for the first time, the weathered leather briefcase clutched in his hand. "I'm sorry. It's been a rather momentous day. They read Dad's will this morning." Walter's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, I heard. That's actually why I'm here." He settled into the armchair by the fireplace, placing his briefcase carefully on the coffee table. "Your grandmother asked me to wait exactly 3 weeks after your father's passing before delivering this to you. Not a day sooner, not a day later." From the briefcase, he withdrew a sealed envelope and a small wooden box, both bearing my grandmother's elegant script. "For Eliza, when the time comes." "What is this?" I asked, taking the items with unsteady hands. Walter stood, straightening, his tweed jacket. "Eleanor's instructions were very specific. I'm to deliver these items and then leave you to review them privately. She said, and I quote, 'Eliza will know what to do once she understands the full picture.'" Something in his tone made me look up sharply. "Did you know what my father was planning? With the company?" Walter's expression remained carefully neutral. "I was not privy to Daniel's will, no. But Eleanor—" "Well, your grandmother was a remarkably perceptive woman. She anticipated certain outcomes." Before I could press further, he headed for the door. "I'll see myself out, Eliza. Eleanor suggested you might want to review these documents tonight, in private. She also mentioned something about the Shanghai contract, that you should hold off on any discussions about it until you've read everything." The mention of Shanghai sent a chill down my spine. How could my grandmother have known about a negotiation that only concluded 2 months after her death? After Walter left, I returned to the window seat, the envelope and box heavy in my hands. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, its resonant tones filling the cottage. I ran my fingers over my grandmother's handwriting, remembering how she had taught me to sign my name with the same decisive strokes when I was just a child. Taking a deep breath, I broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in my grandmother's distinctive script. "My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, then your father is gone. And I suspect he has done exactly what I feared he would do. Daniel was brilliant in many ways, but he was always blinded by tradition and appearances. He could never see past his own narrow vision of what Blackwell Industries should be and who should lead it. By now, he has likely handed control to Vanessa, believing her to be the appropriate successor simply because she followed his playbook, without question. He never understood that true leadership requires more than obedience. It requires vision, integrity, and the courage to challenge the status quo when necessary. These are qualities you possess in abundance, my darling girl. What your father also never understood, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that Blackwell Industries was never solely his to give away. When your grandfather and I founded the company, 60 years ago, we established certain provisions that Daniel, in his arrogance, apparently believed would never matter. The truth, which your father has concealed from both you and Vanessa, is that I retained a significant ownership stake in Blackwell Industries through a complex network of holding companies and trusts. While I allowed Daniel to believe he controlled everything, I quietly maintained my position as majority shareholder. Over the years, as I watched you grow into the leader Blackwell Industries truly needs, I began transferring those shares into a trust, bearing your name. The transfer was completed 6 months before my death, through channels your father never bothered to monitor. He always did underestimate women's business, as he called it. In the wooden box, you will find documentation of your ownership, position, 51% of all voting shares in Blackwell Industries, legally transferred and ironclad. Your father's will may have given Vanessa the title, but you, my dear Eliza, have always held the true power. The Shanghai contract was the final test. I arranged for that opportunity through old connections, knowing it would require exactly your brand of diplomacy and innovation. You passed with flying colors, as I knew you would. The board meeting next month will require a full accounting of all shareholders. That is when you should reveal your position. Not a moment sooner. Let Vanessa believe she has won until then. It will make the lesson all the more impactful. Use this power wisely, Eliza. Not for revenge, though I know that would be tempting, but to reshape Blackwell Industries into what it always should have been, a force for innovation and progress, not just profit at any cost. All my love, Grandma Eleanor P.S. The grandfather clock contains a hidden compartment behind the moon dial. Inside, you'll find the original company charter with the provisions your father conveniently lost decades ago. Walter has copies, of course, but I thought you should have the original. My hands trembled as I set down the letter and reached for the wooden box. Inside, just as Grandma had promised, were stock certificates, trust documents, and legal paperwork confirming my majority ownership of Blackwell Industries. There were also USB drives labeled financial records and board meeting minutes, private sessions. I sat in stunned silence as the implications washed over me. All those years of feeling second best, of fighting for every scrap of respect, of watching Vanessa effortlessly claim the attention and approval I worked so hard for. And all along, My grandmother had been quietly ensuring that when it truly mattered, I would have the final say. My phone buzzed again from where I'd left it on the coffee table. I reached for it automatically, seeing yet another message from Vanessa. The Shanghai clients are asking for confirmation on next steps. Need your notes ASAP. Dinner tomorrow? For the first time since the will reading that morning, I felt a smile, tugging at my lips. I would need to move carefully over the next few weeks, gathering allies, reviewing the documents Grandma had left, understanding exactly what position I was in before making my move. Patience, Eliza, I could almost hear my grandmother saying. The best victories are the ones your opponents never see coming until it's too late. I typed a brief response to Vanessa. We'll be in touch about Shanghai soon. Taking a few days off. To process everything. Then I turned back to the grandfather clock, its steady ticking a reminder of my grandmother's words. It keeps perfect time, even when the world around it doesn't. The moon dial gleamed in the dim light. I carefully opened the glass door protecting the clock face and pressed the decorative moon exactly as I'd seen my grandmother do countless times when I was a child, revealing a small compartment I had never known existed. Inside was a yellowed document, the original Blackwell Industries charter, dated 1963, bearing the signatures of both my grandparents as equal partners. The world my father had built was about to change fundamentally, and neither he nor Vanessa had ever suspected the ground shifting beneath their feet. I carefully returned everything to the box, poured myself another finger of scotch, and raised my glass to the grandfather clock. Well played, Grandma, I whispered. Well played indeed. The morning after Walter's visit, I woke before dawn, my mind racing with possibilities that had seemed inconceivable just 24 hours earlier. Rain tapped against the cottage windows, creating a soothing backdrop as I spread my grandmother's documents across the dining table. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, I began to truly understand the scope of what Eleanor Blackwell had orchestrated. The trust documentation was complex even to my trained eye, deliberately structured through a labyrinth of holding companies and offshore entities. Each paper trail led back to a master holding company called Clockwork Ventures, a name that made me smile. Thinking of the grandfather clock still steadily ticking in my living room. The formation date of Clockwork was my birthday, 36 years ago. Grandma Eleanor had been planning this for my entire life. As the rain intensified outside, I opened my laptop and inserted the first USB drive labeled Financial Records. It contained years of meticulous accounting, dividend payments, stock purchases, proxy agreements, all managed through Swiss and Cayman accounts that never appeared in the family business records. My grandmother, the quiet homemaker whom my father had often dismissed as just a figurehead on the original company documents, had been playing a long, patient game of corporate chess. My God, Grandma, I whispered to the empty room. You were a financial mastermind. I moved to the second USB drive, which contained recorded minutes from private board sessions going back 15 years. The first video I played showed my father, 15 years younger but with the same commanding presence, addressing a smaller version of our current board. The European expansion is premature, he declared firmly. We need to focus on consolidating our North American operations before taking unnecessary risks overseas. The camera panned to show a younger version of myself, professionally dressed but visibly nervous. The European market can't wait, Dad. Our competitors are already establishing footholds in Germany and France. If we don't move now, we'll be playing catch-up for a decade. My father's dismissive wave was painfully familiar. You're too inexperienced to understand the full picture, Eliza. This isn't a graduate school case study. It's real business with real consequences. I remembered that meeting vividly. It was my first major proposal as a junior executive. What I hadn't known then, and what the video revealed next, shocked me to my core. After the official meeting, Adjourned and most members left, the camera continued recording. My father remained with 3 of his closest allies on the board. "She's got the right instinct about Europe," he admitted, swirling scotch in a crystal tumbler. "But she needs to learn patience. Let her fight for it for another year. It'll toughen her up." One of the older board members, long since retired, chuckled. "You're grooming her the hard way, Daniel." My father's response made my blood run cold. "Eliza needs to be twice as tough as any man in this business. When she eventually takes over, she can't have any weak spots for them to target." I paused the video, my coffee forgotten. When she eventually takes over. My father had intended for me to lead the company all along. But then what had changed? I scrolled through the video files, noting dates and significant board decisions, until I found one marked simply "Succession Plan Change" from 3 years ago, right after I'd broken off my engagement to Bradley Harrington. The timing couldn't be coincidental. In this recording, my father looked older, more rigid, his expression set in the stern lines that had become more common in his final years. He addressed just 2 board members, the most senior and loyal of his advisors. "Eliza has demonstrated that she prioritizes personal choice over company interests," he said, his disappointment evident. "The Harrington merger would have secured our shipping infrastructure for generations. Instead, she's left us vulnerable to market fluctuations and competitive pressure." One advisor spoke carefully. "Daniel, Eliza has doubled our European revenue and successfully established our Asian presence. Perhaps personal compatibility should remain separate from business decisions." My father's fist hitting the table made the camera shake slightly. "That's exactly the soft thinking that weakens great companies. The Blackwells have always understood that every decision, every relationship, every marriage serves the company first. Vanessa understands this. She made the right choice with Julian Hayes." The second advisor cleared his throat. "So you're proposing to change the succession plan, after all the groundwork we've laid with Eliza?" My father's face hardened. "Eliza has the business acumen, but Vanessa has the Blackwell commitment. We'll transition key responsibilities to Vanessa gradually. By the time I step down, she'll be ready." I closed the laptop, a strange mix of emotions churning inside me. All those years, I'd believed my father didn't think I was capable enough, when in reality, he'd punished me for refusing to sacrifice my personal happiness for a business advantage. His ultimate act of control, disinheriting me, was merely his final attempt to force my compliance from beyond the grave. My phone rang, breaking the spell of the past. Margaret's name flashed on the screen. "They're already dismantling your team," she said, without preamble when I answered. Vanessa called. "An emergency department head meeting this morning. Julian Hayes is bringing in consultants to streamline international operations." "Streamline" meaning eliminate the people loyal to me, I translated. "Exactly." Chen from Shanghai called in a panic. "Apparently, the consultants are suggesting pulling back on the sustainability commitments you made as part of the contract." I closed my eyes, processing this information. The Shanghai contract had been revolutionary. The first major industrial agreement in the region with binding environmental protection clauses. It had taken months of delicate negotiation to make it happen. "What does my sister need from me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Your relationship with the Chinese environmental minister, the one whose daughter you helped get into Stanford's sustainability program." I almost laughed. Vanessa would never understand that the relationship wasn't a business transaction, but a genuine connection built on shared values and trust. "Tell Chen I'll handle it," I promised Margaret. "And Margaret, don't quit yet, no matter what they say." After hanging up, I turned back to the grandfather clock, now seeing it with new eyes. It wasn't just a family heirloom. It was my grandmother's message to me, about patience, about timing, about the hidden mechanisms that keep things working behind the scenes. I needed to understand exactly how much power I truly held before making any moves. I needed a financial advisor I could trust. Completely, someone not connected to Blackwell Industries. And I needed to keep Vanessa believing she had won, at least for now. I picked up my phone and made a call to the one person who might understand both the financial and emotional complexities of my situation. Dr. Mei Lin, my former college roommate who now ran one of the most respected independent financial analysis firms in the country. I need your absolute discretion, I told her after explaining the basics of my situation. You have it, Mei promised. Send what you can securely. I'll clear my schedule for tomorrow. The next morning, I drove 3 hours to Mei's office in a neighboring state, carrying copies of the most essential documents. Her offices occupied the top floor of a sleek building downtown, with views of both the city skyline and the distant mountains. Like me, Mei had built her success through relentless work and strategic thinking. Your grandmother was brilliant, she said after reviewing the trust documentation for 2 hours. This structure is virtually unassailable. Meaning Vanessa can't challenge it? Mei smiled, her sharp eyes reflecting the strategic mind that had made her a formidable financial analyst. She can try, but Eleanor created a perfect paper trail. Every transfer was legal, properly recorded, and conducted through legitimate channels over decades. The shares aren't part of your father's estate because they never belonged to him in the first place. They've been held in trust, with you as the beneficiary. I leaned back in my chair, the reality still sinking in. So, at the shareholder meeting next month, you'll have controlling interest, Mei confirmed. But Eliza, you need to be prepared for the aftermath. Your sister won't just accept this gracefully. That was an understatement. Vanessa had spent her entire life believing she was entitled to the Blackwell legacy. Finding out that she'd been CEO for less than a month before having the rug pulled out from under her would be devastating, and Vanessa had never handled disappointment well. There's something else you should know, Mei added, turning to her computer. I ran a preliminary analysis of Blackwell's current financial position. She pulled up a series of charts that made my stomach clench. Your father made some questionable decisions in his final year. The company is overextended, particularly in North American real estate holdings. And these executive compensation packages approved 6 months ago. She highlighted a section of the report. They're draining operational capital at an alarming rate. I studied the numbers, the executive structure suddenly becoming clear. My father had packed the upper management, with people loyal to him and Vanessa, then approved golden parachutes that would make it prohibitively expensive to remove them. He was creating a fortress around Vanessa, I murmured, making sure I couldn't easily dislodge her supporters even if I somehow challenged her position. Mei nodded. Exactly. You may control the shares, but transforming the company culture will be another battle entirely. By the time I left Mei's office late that afternoon, I had a clearer understanding of both my advantages and the challenges ahead. I also had a carefully drafted strategy for the coming weeks, a plan that would require patience, precision, and perfect timing. On the drive back to the cottage, my phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Vanessa again. This time I answered. You've been avoiding me, she said, her tone somewhere between accusation and forced sisterly concern. I've been processing, I replied neutrally. It's been a significant adjustment. Vanessa sighed dramatically. I know this is difficult, Eliza, but you have to understand. Dad made his decision based on what's best for the company. You've always been too idealistic. The irony of her statement in light of what I now knew almost made me laugh. Instead, I kept my tone measured. You may be right. My acquiescence clearly surprised her. Well, good. I'm glad you're being reasonable. Now about the Shanghai contract. The team needs your notes on Minister Chen's daughter. What was her name again? Leon, I said. And she's not a bargaining chip, Vanessa. She's a brilliant environmental scientist who earned her place at Stanford. Of course, Vanessa replied dismissively. But connections are connections, right? The consultants think we can modify some of those costly environmental provisions while maintaining the relationship. Now I understood why she had been pursuing me so persistently. The Shanghai contract was worth billions, but its environmental clauses, my non-negotiable conditions, would cut into the profit margins my father had promised the board. The sustainability provisions aren't negotiable, I said flatly. They're integral to the agreement. That's not your call anymore, Eliza, Vanessa reminded me, her voice hardening slightly. But I'm trying to be inclusive here. The charity gala is this Saturday. Come, be seen supporting the transition. Show the board you're a team player, and I'll make sure your environmental concerns get consideration. The implied threat was clear. Play nice or watch your life's work be dismantled. 3 days ago, I would have had no choice but to acquiesce or walk away entirely. Now, I had options neither of us had imagined possible. I'll be there, I promised, keeping any hint of my new knowledge from my voice. Text me the details. After. Hanging up, I pulled over at a scenic overlook, needing a moment to clear my head. The valley stretched below, the late afternoon sun turning everything golden. My grandmother had loved views like this. Perspective, she called it. The ability to see both the details and the bigger picture simultaneously. I needed that perspective, now. The shareholder meeting was still 3 weeks away. I couldn't reveal my hand prematurely, but I also couldn't stand by while Vanessa dismantled everything I had built. My phone buzzed with an incoming email from May, the detailed analysis she had promised. The subject line read simply, Review of Golden Parachutes, Potential Vulnerabilities Found. I smiled, feeling the first stirrings of a counteroffensive forming in my mind. My father may have created a fortress around Vanessa, but every fortress has its weaknesses. I just needed to find the right pressure points. The charity gala had always been Blackwell Industries' premier social event of the year, an opportunity to impress clients, curry favor with politicians, and remind everyone of the family's position in the business community. This year, it would also serve as Vanessa's coronation as the new head of the Blackwell Empire. I arrived deliberately late, giving Vanessa time to establish herself at the center of attention. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements that probably cost more than what some of our factory workers made in a month. A thought that would have seemed merely cynical 3 weeks ago now felt like a call to action. Conversations hushed briefly as I entered, curious eyes tracking my movement through the crowd. Everyone was wondering the same thing. How was the passed-over Blackwell daughter handling her demotion? I had dressed for psychological warfare. A deep emerald gown that I knew complemented my coloring perfectly, grandmother Eleanor's pearl, and diamond earrings, and the quiet confidence of someone holding 4 aces in a high-stakes poker game. Let them look. Let them wonder. Eliza, darling. Vanessa spotted me from across the room, advancing with a flute of champagne extended like a peace offering. She had opted for a designer dress in Blackwell corporate blue, subtle branding that our father would have appreciated. I was beginning to think you wouldn't show. I accepted the champagne with a smile that revealed nothing. And miss your big debut? I wouldn't dream of it. Vanessa looped her arm through mine, a gesture that would appear sisterly to observers but felt like she was staking a claim. Come say hello to the board. They've been asking about you. She steered me toward a cluster of older men in expensive suits, my father's closest allies and advisors. Men who had watched me grow up, who had guided my early career, and who had ultimately approved my father's decision to pass me over. Howard, look who finally arrived, Vanessa announced to the board chairman, her voice carrying just enough false brightness to set my teeth on edge. Howard Jameson had been my father's best friend since college. He'd sent me a graduation gift. When I completed my MBA and had once told me I had the sharpest business mind of anyone under 40 he'd ever met. Now he regarded me with the careful expression of someone encountering an unpredictable animal. "Eliza," he said, offering his hand. "Good to see you. We've missed your insights at the executive meetings." I shook his hand firmly. "I'm sure Vanessa has everything well in hand." Another board member, Franklin Pierce, joined the conversation. We were just discussing the Shanghai situation. Bit of a sticky wicket with those environmental clauses. I sipped my champagne, watching them over the rim of my glass. The Shanghai contract is binding as written. Any attempt to modify the sustainability provisions would constitute a breach. Vanessa laughed lightly, as if I'd said something charmingly naive. Legal is reviewing our options. The provisions may be more flexible than they appear. They're not, I said simply. Minister Chen's daughter Leon helped draft them specifically to prevent exactly this kind of corporate backsliding. Howard frowned. That sounds rather adversarial for a partnership agreement. Not adversarial, I corrected. Prudent. Minister, Chen has seen too many Western companies make environmental promises to gain access to Chinese markets, only to dilute those commitments once contracts are signed. Nevertheless, Vanessa interjected, her smile tightening, we need to consider shareholder interests first. The sustainability measures add nearly 12% to manufacturing costs and prevent an environmental disaster that would cost 10 times that amount to remediate, I countered. Not to mention protecting the company's reputation in a market increasingly conscious of corporate responsibility. For a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across Howard's face, a recognition of the strategic sense in my position. Then Vanessa smoothly changed the subject, guiding the conversation towards safer territory. Gentlemen, I need to introduce my sister to the governor. We'll continue this discussion at Tuesday's meeting. As she led me away, her grip on my arm tightened painfully. What are you doing? She hissed through her perfect smile. You're undermining me in front of the board. I'm stating facts, I replied calmly. The Shanghai contract cannot be modified without severe consequences. You're not in charge anymore, Eliza, she reminded me, her eyes flashing with irritation. I decide what contracts can or cannot be modified. We reached a momentarily empty corner of the ballroom, and Vanessa dropped all pretense of sisterly affection. I'm trying to be generous here. The consulting position Dad arranged for you is more than fair, considering how you've challenged his vision at every turn. But if you keep this up, I'll have to reconsider even that arrangement. I met her gaze steadily. You should be careful about making threats you can't follow through on, Vanessa. Something in my tone must have registered because she studied my face with sudden suspicion. What's that supposed to mean? Before I could respond, Julian Hayes approached, sliding a possessive arm around Vanessa's waist. The mayor wants a photo with both Blackwell sisters, he announced. For continuity's sake. The moment broken, Vanessa composed herself and nodded. Of course. Family unity is so important during transitions. As we crossed the ballroom toward the waiting photographer, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirrored wall. Next to Vanessa's corporate blue, my emerald green stood out like a declaration of independence. It reminded me of something my grandmother had told me years ago when I complained about always feeling like the odd one out in the Blackwell family. Being different isn't a weakness, Eliza, she had said. It's only a disadvantage when you try to play by their rules instead of creating your own. For decades, I had tried to succeed within my father's framework, proving my worth according to his metrics while still maintaining my principles. Now I understood what Grandma Eleanor had been preparing me for all along. I didn't need to play by the established Blackwell rules anymore. I was about to change the entire game. As the camera flashed, capturing the image of two sisters in a moment, of apparent harmony, I allowed myself a genuine smile for the first time that evening. In less than 3 weeks, this carefully constructed facade would shatter, revealing the truth my grandmother had protected for decades. I just had to keep playing the part of the gracious loser until then. 2 days before the shareholder meeting, Vanessa summoned me to the executive floor of Blackwell Tower. The message came through her new executive assistant, a sleek young woman with a practiced corporate smile who referred to me as Ms. Blackwell rather than by my former title. "Ms. Hayes would like to see you at your earliest convenience," she said over the phone, the subtle emphasis on Vanessa's married name, another reminder of the new order. "I'll be there at 2, I replied, checking my watch. The timing was perfect, just enough hours to finalize my preparations with Walter and May. In the 3 weeks since discovering my grandmother's secret legacy, I had been meticulously assembling the pieces I would need for what was to come. Walter had helped me understand the legal ramifications of my position, while May had conducted a forensic analysis of Blackwell Industries' finances, uncovering patterns that painted a troubling picture of my father's final years at the helm. "Remember," Walter cautioned during our final strategy session that morning, "your strongest position is to appear reasonable, even magnanimous. This isn't about revenge. It's about correction," I agreed, reviewing the documents we had prepared. "Setting right what should never have been wrong in the first place." When I arrived at Blackwell Tower that afternoon, the security guard at the executive elevator, a man who had greeted me by name for over a decade, asked to see my visitor's badge. Another of Vanessa's little power plays. The executive floor had been redesigned in the few weeks since Vanessa took over. The sleek minimalist aesthetic I had championed had been replaced with more traditional corporate grandeur, heavy wooden furniture, plush carpeting, and framed photographs of Vanessa shaking hands with various dignitaries. My father would have approved. "She's waiting for you," the assistant announced, opening the double doors to what had once been my father's office, and briefly, what should have been mine. Vanessa sat behind the massive mahogany desk, a replica of the one our father had used for 30 years. She was dressed in a tailored suit that echoed his style as well, conservative, expensive, designed to intimidate. Julian Hayes stood by the window, ostensibly reviewing documents but clearly there as moral support. "Eliza," Vanessa greeted me, without rising. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." I took a seat across from her without waiting to be invited. "Your message said it was urgent." She exchanged a glance with Julian, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Whatever this meeting was about, they had rehearsed it. "As you know, the annual shareholder meeting is this Friday," Vanessa began, folding her hands on the desk. "You're first, as a consultant rather than an executive." I wanted to discuss expectations. I raised an eyebrow. "Mine or yours?" A flash of annoyance crossed her face before she regained her composure. "Both, actually. The transition hasn't been as smooth as we'd hoped. There have been questions from certain board members about the Shanghai contract and other international operations." "Questions were inevitable," I replied neutrally. "The Asian and European divisions represent over 60% of our growth. The sudden change in leadership naturally concerns our partners." Julian stepped forward, assuming what I recognized as his negotiation posture from previous boardroom encounters. "We need your public support, Eliza. A unified front at the shareholder meeting to demonstrate continuity and stability." Now we were getting to the real purpose of this meeting. They were worried about shareholder confidence, as they should be. The stock had dropped nearly 8% since the announcement of my father's succession plan, with international investors particularly nervous about the change in leadership. "And what would this public support entail?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Vanessa slid a folder across the desk. "We've prepared a statement for you to deliver at the meeting, essentially endorsing the new direction and assuring shareholders that you'll continue to provide guidance during the transition." I opened the folder and scanned the document inside. It was even worse than I'd anticipated. Not just an endorsement, but a full-throated declaration that Vanessa's leadership was the right move for the company's future. It would be political suicide once my ownership position was revealed. "You can't seriously expect me to read this," I said, closing the folder. Would make things easier for everyone, Vanessa countered, including you. Your consulting contract comes up for renewal next quarter. Your cooperation now would be remembered favorably. There it was, the threat barely disguised as an opportunity. Support Vanessa publicly or lose even the modest position I still retained. Julian cleared his throat. We're also prepared to offer additional incentives. A seat on the charitable foundation board, perhaps, where your environmental interests could be channeled constructively. The condescension in his tone made my teeth clench, but I maintained my composure. That's generous, I said, my voice revealing nothing of my true thoughts. But I'll need time to review the statement and suggest amendments. Vanessa frowned. The shareholder meeting is in 2 days. We need to finalize the agenda by tomorrow morning. Then you'll have my response by tomorrow morning, I promised, rising from my chair and taking the folder with me. Was there anything else? Clearly thrown by my apparent compliance, Vanessa hesitated before shaking her head. No, that's all for now. My assistant will expect your revisions by 9 a.m. As I turned to leave, Julian added, This is the right move, Eliza, for the company and for your future with it. I offered a non-committal smile and walked out, maintaining a measured pace until I reached the elevator. Only when the doors closed behind me did I allow myself a moment of quiet rage at their presumption. The folder in my hand represented everything wrong with my father's vision for the company, valuing appearances over substance, loyalty over innovation, tradition over progress. By tomorrow morning, they would have my response, just not the one they were expecting. Margaret was waiting at my cottage when I arrived, her car parked discreetly behind the garage where it wouldn't be visible from the road. After my father's will reading, she had officially been reassigned to another executive, but her loyalty remained with me. They've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow afternoon, she informed me as soon as I walked through the door. Closed session, executives only. No agenda distributed. They're going to try to modify the Shanghai contract before the shareholder meeting, I concluded, setting down my briefcase. Preemptive damage control. Margaret nodded. There's more. HR has prepared termination packages for Chen, Rodriguez, and Patel. She named 3 of my closest allies in international operations, effective immediately after the shareholder meeting. I absorbed this information calmly, though it confirmed my worst fears about Vanessa's intentions. She wasn't just taking over, she was systematically dismantling everything I had built. How's our timing looking? I asked, moving to my desk where a secure laptop contained our counter strategy. Walter has confirmed the major shareholders will all attend in person. May has the financial presentation ready, and I've secured the private conference room at the Archer Hotel for our pre-meeting tomorrow morning. I smiled at Margaret's efficiency. Perfect. And the package for Minister Chen? Delivered by diplomatic courier this morning. His office confirmed. Receipt. With those pieces in place, I was ready for the final component of our plan. I opened my secure laptop and drafted a brief, carefully worded email to Howard Jameson, chairman of the board. Howard, in preparation for Friday's shareholder meeting, I've become aware of concerning information regarding Blackwell Industries' financial governance during the past 18 months. As a significant stakeholder in the company's future, I request a brief opportunity to address these matters during the closed session portion of tomorrow's emergency board meeting. This is not a request I make lightly, but one I believe is essential for the board's fiduciary responsibility. Respectfully, Eliza Blackwell. I hit send, knowing the deliberately vague language would pique Howard's curiosity without revealing my hand. Then I turned my attention to Vanessa's prepared statement, which I methodically shredded and dropped into the fireplace. In its place, I began drafting my own address for the shareholder meeting, one that would reshape Blackwell Industries forever. They have no idea what's coming, do they? Margaret asked, watching the paper curl and blacken in the flames. No, I replied quietly. But then, neither did I, until 3 weeks ago. Howard's response arrived within the hour. A terse agreement. to allot me 15 minutes at the beginning of the closed session. It was all I would need. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. the following day in the company's main conference room, a space I knew intimately from countless presentations and negotiations. Before that, however, I had another critical meeting. At 10 a.m., I stood before a select group gathered in the private conference room at the Archer Hotel. Walter Gibson with his legal team, Mei Lin with her financial analysts, Margaret with her comprehensive knowledge of company operations, and 3 key figures I had flown in specifically for this occasion: Lian Chen, daughter of the Chinese Environment Minister; Raj Patel, my head of European operations; and Sofia Rodriguez, our SAD, Chief Sustainability Officer. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I began, feeling the weight of what we were about to undertake. What I'm about to share will fundamentally change Blackwell Industries. Before I proceed, I need to confirm that everyone here has signed the confidentiality agreements Walter provided. Walter nodded his confirmation, and I took a deep breath before continuing. 3 weeks ago, following my father's death, his will transferred control of Blackwell Industries to my sister, Vanessa Hayes. What neither she nor my father realized was that my grandmother, Eleanor Blackwell, had long ago ensured that outcome would be temporary at best. I activated the presentation screen, displaying the complex ownership structure my grandmother had created. Through a series of holding companies and trusts established over decades, my grandmother transferred controlling interest in Blackwell Industries to me. As of this moment, I own 51% of all voting shares in the company. The room remained silent as the implications sank in. Raj was the first to speak. So, at tomorrow's shareholder meeting, I will assume control of the company, I confirmed. But there are complications we need to address first. May stepped forward, taking over the presentation with clinical precision. Our analysis has identified several concerning patterns in Blackwell's recent financial governance. She displayed a series of charts highlighting unusual transactions and questionable accounting practices. In the 18 months before his death, Daniel Blackwell authorized a series of decisions that have left the company vulnerable. For the next hour, we dissected the problems: overvalued real estate acquisitions, inflated executive compensation packages, strategic divestment from sustainable technologies, and the gradual shifting of resources away from the international divisions that had driven our growth. These weren't merely poor business decisions, May concluded. They represent a deliberate restructuring to consolidate power around Vanessa and her allies, at the expense of the company's long-term health. Sofia Rodriguez, who had pioneered our sustainability initiatives, looked physically ill. The Shanghai contract was just the beginning. They're planning to roll back all our environmental commitments. Not anymore, I assured her. But reversing, the damage will require coordinated action. I turned to Lian Chen. That's where you come in. Your father's position gives us leverage we desperately need. Lian nodded gravely. He suspected something had changed when the new leadership began asking questions about modifying the contract. That's why he sent me, to determine if Blackwell was still a partner worth trusting. And what will you tell him? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She smiled for the first time. That depends entirely on what happens in today's board meeting, doesn't it? With our strategy finalized, we dispersed to prepare for the confrontation ahead. Walter and May would accompany me to the board meeting, while the others would remain on standby for the aftermath. At precisely 2 p.m., I walked into the Blackwell Industries main conference room, Walter and May flanking me like generals preparing for battle. The board members were already seated, with Vanessa at the head of the table, my father's position, and now ostensibly hers. Her expression flickered with surprise at my choice of companions. "Eliza?" Howard greeted me, his tone cautious. "I've allocated 15 minutes at the beginning of our session for your concerns." "Thank you, Howard," I replied, remaining standing as Walter distributed sealed folders to each board member. "Before I begin, I'd like everyone to review these documents. They provide essential context for what I'm about to say. As the board members opened their folders, the room grew eerily quiet. Inside each was a comprehensive summary of my ownership position in Blackwell Industries, complete with legal verification and financial documentation. Vanessa was the first to react, her face draining of color as she flipped through the pages with increasing agitation. "This is absurd," she finally sputtered. "These documents must be forgeries." Walter stepped forward, his dignified presence commanding immediate attention. "I assure you, Ms. Hayes, every document in that folder has been thoroughly authenticated. As Eleanor Blackwell's personal attorney for 40 years, I can attest to both their legitimacy and their binding legal status." Howard Jameson studied the papers with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what they were seeing. These appear to establish that Eliza controls 51% of Blackwell voting shares through a series of trusts established by Eleanor Blackwell. "That's correct," I confirmed. "My grandmother began transferring her shares into these trusts decades ago, completing the process 6 months before her death, well outside any contestable time frame." "This is impossible," Vanessa insisted, her voice rising. "Dad owned controlling interest. He left it to me." "Your father owned 43% of Blackwell Industries," May interjected, her precise, analytical tone cutting through the tension. "He mistakenly believed he controlled the company because Eleanor Blackwell allowed him to think so. The remaining shares were divided among board members, executives, and the trusts Eleanor established." Julian. Hayes, who had been silently absorbing the information, finally spoke. "Even if these documents are legitimate, which I'm not conceding, this revelation should have been made before the succession plan was implemented. Bringing it forward now, after Vanessa has assumed leadership, smacks of opportunism." I turned to address him directly. "The timing was specified in my grandmother's instructions, to be revealed at the first shareholder meeting following my father's death. I'm actually accelerating the timeline by addressing the board first, out of concern for the company's stability." Howard cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Why would Eleanor keep this arrangement secret from her own son?" "Because she knew exactly what he would do if he discovered it," I answered honestly. "My father would have found a way to dismantle these trusts, just as he dismantled everything else that didn't align with his vision, including my position in this company when I refused to marry according to his strategic plans." A tense silence followed this statement. Several of the older board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the marriage arrangement that had been intended to merge Blackwell with the Harrington shipping empire. Vanessa abruptly stood, her composure cracking. "This is a hostile takeover attempt, plain and simple. My sister couldn't accept Dad's decision, so she's manufactured this ridiculous claim with the help of grandmother's senile old lawyer and some financial analyst none of us have vetted." "Actually," May responded coolly, "my firm's credentials are included in your packet. We've performed independent audits for 3 Fortune 100 companies and have been recognized by the Financial Times as one of the top forensic accounting teams in the country." I raised a hand to redirect the conversation. "This isn't about credentials or even about the legitimacy of my ownership position, which I assure you is unassailable. This is about the future of Blackwell Industries." I activated the presentation screen at the end of the room. "And that's where we need to focus our attention now." The screen displayed the first of May's charts, a devastating analysis of the company's financial vulnerability resulting from my father's final decisions. In the 18 months before his death, actions were taken that have placed Blackwell Industries in a precarious position. Overvalued acquisitions, excessive executive compensation, strategic divestment from our most promising growth areas, all apparently designed to entrench a specific leadership structure at the expense of the company's health. For the next 10 minutes, I methodically presented the evidence, watching the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to concern to outright alarm. Even Vanessa fell silent as the extent of the financial manipulation became clear. When I finished, Howard spoke first. If these analyses are accurate, and I have no reason to doubt Ms. Lynn's expertise, we have serious governance issues to address before the shareholder meeting. I agree, I said, which is why I've prepared a transition plan that addresses both the leadership question and the underlying financial concerns. I distributed a second set of documents. This proposal maintains Vanessa's position as CEO for a 6-month transition period, with oversight from a newly formed executive committee. It restructures the problematic compensation packages while preserving key personnel, and it recommits Blackwell Industries to the sustainability initiatives that have driven our growth in Asian and European markets. Vanessa stared at me, confusion replacing anger in her expression. You're not firing me? No, I said simply. Contrary to what you might believe, this isn't about revenge. It's about correction. You have relationships and skills that are valuable. To this company, Vanessa, what you lack is experience in the operational areas that will define our future success. Howard studied the transition plan thoughtfully. This is surprisingly reasonable given the circumstances. Reasonable, Julian interjected. She's still seizing control of the company. I'm exercising the rights of majority ownership. I corrected him. Rights that have been legally mine for years. The only question is whether we handle this transition in a way that strengthens Blackwell Industries or further destabilizes it. The room fell silent as the board members absorbed the full implications of the situation. I had presented them, not just with a change in leadership, but with evidence of financial mismanagement that could potentially trigger regulatory scrutiny if not addressed promptly. I move that we accept Eliza's transition plan as a starting point for discussion, Howard finally said, his authority as chairman asserting itself. We can refine the details before presenting a unified direction to the shareholders on Friday. Several board members nodded in agreement while others looked to Vanessa, waiting for her response. The decision ultimately rested with the board, but without Vanessa's cooperation, the transition would be messy and potentially damaging to the company. Vanessa stood, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might storm out. It would have been in character for the sister I'd known my entire life. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and addressed the board with surprising composure. I need time to review these documents with my legal team, she said, gathering her papers. I propose we adjourn until tomorrow morning to allow for proper due diligence. Howard nodded. A reasonable request. We'll reconvene at 9 a.m. As the meeting dispersed, Vanessa approached me directly, Julian hovering protectively behind her. I don't know how you engineered this, she said quietly, but it won't stand. Dad wanted me to lead this company. Dad wanted a lot of things, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. But Grandma understood what Blackwell Industries actually needs. You have until tomorrow morning to decide if you're part of that future or not. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line as she turned and walked away, Julian following close behind. Several board members approached with questions, which Walter fielded expertly while I gathered my materials. Howard was the last to leave, pausing beside me with a heavy sigh. Your father would be furious about this, you know. Yes, I acknowledged. But my grandmother would be proud. And between the two of them, she was always the better judge of character and of business. As I watched him go, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a profound responsibility. This wasn't just about claiming what should have been mine. It was about steering Blackwell Industries toward a future my father had been unable to envision, but that my grandmother had deemed worth protecting. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Vanessa wouldn't surrender easily. She had too much of our father in her for that. But for the first time in years, I felt the weight of uncertainty lifting from my shoulders. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally out in the open. The grandfather clock had struck, right on time. The night after the board meeting, I couldn't sleep. The cottage felt too quiet, the weight of what I'd set in motion too heavy for rest. At 3 a.m, I found myself on the deck overlooking the lake, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill, watching moonlight ripple across the water. My phone vibrated with an incoming text. May, also apparently sleepless. Vanessa's team requested our complete financial analysis. They're taking this seriously. That was unexpected. I had anticipated legal challenges, emotional outbursts, perhaps even attempts to rally board members against me. Methodical due diligence suggested a more calculated response than the sister I knew was capable of. Either Vanessa was growing up quickly or someone else was guiding her strategy. Forward everything, I replied. Complete transparency now serves our interests. As dawn broke over the lake, painting the water in shades of pink and gold, I made a decision. This transition wasn't just about changing leadership. It was an opportunity to fundamentally transform how Blackwell Industries operated. My father had built a company that prized hierarchy, control, and profit above all else. I envisioned something different. A company where innovation, sustainability, and shared prosperity could coexist with financial success. I returned inside to my grandmother's clock, its steady ticking a reminder of her patient, decades-long strategy. "I understand now, Grandma," I murmured to the empty room. This was never just about me getting what I deserved. It was about the company becoming what it should have been all along. The reconvened board meeting the next morning began with a surprise. Vanessa arrived not with Julian Hayes in tow, but accompanied by Anton Blackwell, our father's younger brother who had distanced himself from the family business decades ago to pursue humanitarian work in developing countries. "Uncle Anton?" I said, genuinely shocked to see him. He had missed even my father's funeral, citing commitments in Southeast Asia. Anton embraced me briefly, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Eliza, you've started quite the revolution. I hear." Vanessa took her seat at the table, her expression carefully neutral. "I've asked Anton to serve as my advisor during this transition. His perspective as a Blackwell who understands both the family legacy and global development needs seems particularly relevant now." It was a clever move. Anton was respected by both sides of the family and had substantial moral authority given his humanitarian work. His presence signaled that Vanessa was taking this seriously and thinking beyond her immediate self-interest. Howard called the meeting to order. "Yesterday, we were presented with evidence that Eliza Blackwell holds majority ownership of Blackwell Industries through trusts established by Eleanor Blackwell. We were also presented with concerning financial analyses and a proposed transition plan. Vanessa requested time to review these materials with her team. I believe she's prepared to respond now." Vanessa stood, looking more composed than I had ever seen her in a professional setting. "After careful review with legal and financial advisors, we acknowledge the validity of Eliza's ownership position." A murmur ran through the board members. "The trusts established by our grandmother appear legally sound and properly executed." She paused, making eye contact with me directly. "However, the financial analyses presented yesterday, while technically accurate, lack important context about the strategic vision behind my father's recent decisions. With the board's permission, I'd like to present an alternative interpretation and a counterproposal for the transition." Howard nodded. "Please proceed." For the next 30 minutes, Vanessa delivered a surprisingly nuanced presentation. She acknowledged the financial risks in my father's recent decisions, but framed them as calculated gambles designed to position Blackwell Industries for a changing global marketplace. She defended the executive compensation packages as necessary to retain key talent during a leadership transition. Most surprisingly, she proposed a modified version of my transition plan that preserved many of its core elements while reframing them as evolutions of my father's vision rather than corrections. In summary, she concluded, I propose a co-leadership model for the next 12 months. Eliza's controlling interest is acknowledged, but executive decision-making is shared between us, with clearly defined areas of authority based on our respective strengths. I maintain oversight of North American operations and client relationships, while Eliza directs international divisions and sustainability initiatives. The room fell silent as board members processed this unexpected proposal. It was both a concession and a challenge, acknowledging my ownership while attempting to preserve Vanessa's executive role beyond the 6 months I had proposed. Uncle Anton spoke for the first time. If I may add some context to Vanessa's proposal, having spent decades working with international development organizations, I've seen firsthand how sustainability initiatives like those Eliza has pioneered can transform communities and create lasting business relationships. Combining that progressive approach with the stability of Blackwell's traditional operations could create something truly remarkable. Howard looked to me. Eliza, your thoughts on Vanessa's counter-proposal? All eyes turned in my direction. This wasn't at all what I had expected. I had prepared for resistance, for legal challenges, for attempts to undermine my position. Instead, Vanessa was offering a compromise that, while self-serving, also contained elements that could genuinely benefit the company. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of this proposal, I began carefully. The co-leadership model has merit in theory, particularly during a transition period. However, I have concerns about its practical implementation, especially given our historical differences in management philosophy. Vanessa leaned forward. That's precisely why we need Uncle Anton as a neutral third party to help us navigate those differences. He understands both the Blackwell legacy and the future you envision. It was a shrewd move using our uncle as both shield and bridge. I studied Vanessa's expression, searching for signs of the manipulation tactics she had learned from our father. Instead, I saw something unexpected, a genuine desire to salvage not just her position, but her relationship to the company she had been groomed to lead. I propose we take this discussion into a private session, I suggested. Vanessa, Uncle Anton, and I should discuss the specifics of how a co-leadership model might function before presenting a unified plan to the board. Howard seemed relieved by this constructive approach. An excellent suggestion. We'll recess for 1 hour to allow for that conversation. As the board members filed out, Vanessa, Anton, and I remained seated, facing each other across the polished boardroom table. When the door closed behind the last person, silence stretched between us. Anton broke it first. Your grandmother would be proud of both of you right now. Eleanor always believed in finding solutions rather than winning arguments. Vanessa's composure slipped slightly, a flash of genuine emotion crossing her face. Why didn't she tell me about the trusts? Did she think I wasn't worthy? The question caught me off guard. In all my planning, I had focused on the business implications, not the personal betrayal Vanessa might feel from our grandmother's secret arrangements. I don't think it was about worthiness, I said slowly. From what I can tell from her letters and documentation, Grandma saw different strengths in each of us. She believed I had the vision to lead Blackwell in the direction it needed to go, but she never discounted your abilities. Your sister excels at client relationships and corporate cohesion, Anton observed, skills Eleanor valued highly, but didn't necessarily see as the primary qualities needed for Blackwell's future challenges. Vanessa absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. And you didn't know about any of this until after Dad died? Not until 3 weeks ago, I confirmed. Grandma arranged for Walter to deliver everything exactly 3 weeks after Dad's passing. Vanessa shook her head, a hint of admiration breaking through her reserve. She orchestrated this whole scenario from beyond. The grave, that's actually impressive. It was classic Eleanor, Anton agreed with a gentle smile. She played the long game better than anyone I've ever known. For the next 45 minutes, we hammered out the framework for a modified co-leadership model. I insisted on maintaining ultimate decision-making authority as the majority shareholder, but agreed to clearly defined areas where Vanessa would have operational autonomy. We established a dispute resolution process with Uncle Anton serving as mediator when necessary. Most importantly, we developed a plan to address the problematic financial decisions that had placed the company in a vulnerable position. When the board reconvened, we presented a united front, still clearly distinct in our personal styles and priorities, but aligned on a path forward that would stabilize the company while positioning it for evolution. Howard studied our joint proposal with evident relief. This is remarkably comprehensive given the time constraints. I believe it addresses the core concerns while preserving institutional stability. The board voted unanimously to approve our co-leadership model as an interim governance structure, with a comprehensive review scheduled for 6 months later. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached to offer congratulations and support, clearly relieved that a potentially messy power struggle had transformed into a controlled transition. "Don't think this means I've surrendered," Vanessa murmured as we shook hands for the photographers who had been summoned to document our new partnership. "I still believe Dad's vision for Blackwell was the right one." "I wouldn't expect anything less," I replied, matching her camera-ready smile. "But maybe we'll both discover that there's room for more than one vision in this company's future." The weeks following our agreement were intensely demanding. Vanessa and I established separate offices, hers in the traditional executive suite, mine in a more modern space, 2 floors below that had previously housed the international division. The physical separation helped minimize direct conflicts while we adjusted to our new power-sharing arrangement. My first priority was addressing the Shanghai contract and rebuilding trust with Minister Chen. A video conference with the minister and his daughter Leon cleared the air. With my position now secure, the environmental provisions would remain intact, and we would expand our sustainability commitments across our Asian operations. "My father appreciates consistency," Leon told me after the formal discussions concluded. "He has seen too many Western companies change course with each new leadership team." "That won't happen at Blackwell," I assured her. "Not anymore." Implementing financial corrections proved more challenging. The executive compensation packages my father had approved were legally binding, and several senior executives threatened litigation when we proposed modifications. Uncle Anton proved invaluable here, using his moral authority and family connection to bring reluctant executives to the table for good faith negotiations. "Your father created this mess," he told me, bluntly during a late-night strategy session. He wanted to ensure Vanessa would be surrounded by allies loyal to his vision. What he didn't count on was Eleanor's countermove, or you and Vanessa actually finding common ground. "We haven't found common ground yet," I corrected him. "We've just established a procedural framework for managing our disagreements," Anton smiled knowingly. "That's how it starts. Your grandparents disagreed fundamentally about business philosophy when they founded this company. Their ability to establish protocols for working through those differences was what made Blackwell successful, in the first place, before your father imposed his singular vision." This perspective forced me to reconsider what I knew about Blackwell's early history. My father had always presented the company narrative as a straight line from founding to present day, with each generation building directly on the last. The idea that fundamental disagreements about direction had been part of our corporate DNA from the beginning was strangely comforting. "Do you think Vanessa is capable of real change?" I asked Anton. "Or is she just biding her time, waiting for an opportunity to reassert Dad's approach?" He considered this thoughtfully. People generally don't change their core values, but they can evolve in how they express them. Vanessa values tradition, stability, and the Blackwell legacy. That won't change. But her understanding of what that legacy truly encompasses might, especially if she sees evidence that your approach produces results. His words stayed with me as I worked through the tangled financial situation my father had left behind. Each problematic decision revealed itself as part of a larger pattern, not just securing Vanessa's position, but systematically dismantling the progressive elements I had fought to introduce. It was as if my father had tried to erase my influence from the company's future, unaware that my grandmother had already ensured the opposite outcome. 4 weeks after our agreement, as I reviewed the latest financial projections with May in my office, Margaret interrupted with breaking news. The Hansen Group just announced they're terminating merger talks with Harrington Shipping, she reported, referring to a major deal that had been in negotiations for months. Bradley Harrington is reportedly furious. I felt a complicated surge of emotions at this news. Bradley, the man I had refused to marry despite my father's orchestrations, had been counting on that merger to save his family's struggling shipping empire. Its collapse meant Harrington Shipping would likely be forced to seek other partners, potentially including Blackwell Industries. The timing is interesting, May observed. Hansen announced their withdrawal the day after our leadership transition became public knowledge. You think they're positioning for negotiations with us instead? I asked, mind racing with strategic implications. It would make sense. Our Asian expansion makes us a more valuable shipping partner than we were 3 months ago. And your new leadership position changes the negotiation dynamics considerably. I nodded slowly, understanding the subtext. Bradley had pursued me relentlessly even after I broke our engagement, convinced I would eventually yield to my father's pressure. Now the tables had turned. He needed a business alliance far more than I needed a marriage of convenience. Prepare. A preliminary analysis of a potential strategic partnership with Harrington, I instructed May. Not a merger, but a limited operational alliance focusing on the Asian shipping routes. As May departed to gather the necessary data, Margaret lingered. Bradley called 3 times this morning, she informed me with a knowing look. Shall I continue to hold his calls? I considered the poetry of the situation, how completely the power dynamics had reversed in just a few short weeks. No, I decided. Schedule him for lunch next week, in the company dining room. The very public company dining room? Margaret clarified, a smile tugging at her lips. Exactly. Let's make sure everyone understands the new reality at Blackwell Industries. As she left to make the arrangements, I turned to the window overlooking the city. The afternoon sun glinted off neighboring skyscrapers, highlighting the Blackwell Tower logo that had represented my family's legacy for generations. That legacy was now in my hands, along with the responsibility to shape it into something that honored not just my grandmother's vision, but the potential she had always seen in me. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Vanessa remained a complicated ally at best. The financial situation required careful navigation, and the corporate culture still reflected decades of my father's influence. But for the first time since entering the family business, I felt truly free to lead according to my own compass rather than fighting for incremental changes within my father's framework. The grandfather clock had indeed struck at precisely the right moment, not just marking the transfer of power, but signaling the beginning of a new era for Blackwell Industries. 1 year after the revelation of my grandmother's secret legacy transformed Blackwell Industries, I stood on the observation deck of our new Asia-Pacific headquarters in Singapore. The building, a marvel of sustainable architecture with living walls, solar integration, and water reclamation systems, represented everything I had fought for during my years at the company. Below me stretched Marina Bay, ships moving through the harbor like pieces on a game board. Each one part of the intricate global network we had expanded over the past 12 months. Quite a view, said a familiar voice behind me. Vanessa approached, dressed in a sleek business suit that had become her signature style, traditional, enough to satisfy conservative board members while incorporating subtle modern elements that signaled evolution rather than revolution. Worth every negotiation, I agreed, turning to face my sister. The year of co-leadership had changed both of us in ways neither could have anticipated. How was the meeting with the Malaysian investors? Productive. They're impressed with the quarterly results. She handed me a tablet displaying our latest financial performance, figures that validated our new direction and exceeded the projections even May had considered optimistic. Green energy initiatives generating actual profit. Dad would never have believed it possible. I smiled at the candid acknowledgement. He had blind spots. We all do. The past year had been transformative for Blackwell Industries. Our co-leadership model, initially viewed as a temporary compromise, had evolved into an effective partnership that leveraged our complementary strengths. Vanessa excelled at maintaining relationships with traditional clients and navigating complex corporate politics, while I drove innovation and international expansion. Uncle Anton had mediated fewer disputes than anyone expected, as we developed a mutual respect that surprised even ourselves. The board meeting starts in an hour, Vanessa reminded me. Are you ready for the big announcement? Today marked the end of our formal co-leadership arrangement. The board would vote on the new governance structure we had jointly proposed, one that would establish me as CEO and Vanessa as president, with clearly defined authorities that institutionalized our successful division of responsibilities. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, taking a final look at the harbor below. I never expected us to end up here when Walter handed me that box a year ago. Vanessa's expression grew thoughtful. I've been meaning to ask you something. That day in the boardroom when you presented your evidence, you could have pushed for my complete removal. The financial issues Dad created gave you more than enough justification. Why didn't you? It was a question that had lingered unspoken between us for months. I considered my answer carefully. Grandma's letters made something clear to me. This was never about winning or losing. It was about building something better than either of us could create alone. Dad's way was to eliminate opposition. Grandma believed in finding the value in different perspectives. Vanessa absorbed this, looking out over the harbor where vessels of all sizes navigated the complex shipping lanes in coordinated harmony. I hated you that day, she admitted quietly. I felt betrayed by Grandma, humiliated in front of the board. I was certain you'd dismantle everything I'd worked for. And now? I asked. A small smile touched her lips. Now I understand what Grandma saw in both of us. Your vision would mean nothing without the operational foundation I maintain. My stability would become stagnation without your push for innovation. She knew that before either of us did. The honesty of this exchange, something that would have been impossible a year ago, reflected how far we had come. The antagonism that defined our relationship for decades had gradually transformed into a functional partnership built on mutual respect, if not always perfect agreement. Ms. Blackwell, my assistant called from the doorway. The major shareholders have arrived for the pre-meeting briefing. Vanessa checked her watch. I'll handle the briefing. Take a few more minutes if you need them. She squeezed my arm lightly before departing. A small gesture of support that would have been unthinkable in our previous dynamic. Alone again, I opened my tablet to review the final quarterly report. The numbers told a story beyond financial success. Employee retention had improved by 23%. Our sustainability initiatives had reduced operational costs while opening new market opportunities. The strategic partnership with Harrington Shipping, negotiated on strictly business terms despite Bradley's initial attempts to rekindle personal connections, had strengthened our global distribution network. Most significantly, we had established the Eliza Blackwell Foundation, dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs in sustainable technology. The foundation, funded by redirecting a portion of the excessive executive compensation packages my father had implemented, embodied the values my grandmother had quietly nurtured throughout her life. My phone buzzed with a message from Uncle Anton. Your grandmother's clock has been installed in the boardroom as requested. Perfect timing as always. I smiled at his wordplay. The grandfather clock, my most treasured inheritance besides the company shares, now stood in Blackwell Industries' Singapore boardroom, its steady ticking a reminder of patience, hidden strengths, and the wisdom of playing the long game. As I made my way to the executive floor for the board meeting, I passed a wall displaying 3 portraits: my grandfather and grandmother as young entrepreneurs founding Blackwell Industries, my father at the height of his corporate power, and now a new addition, Vanessa and me together, representing the next evolution of the Blackwell legacy. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. Major shareholders, board members, key executives, all rose in a show of respect that acknowledged not just my controlling interest, but the proven success of our new direction. Vanessa stood at the head of the table, already in the middle of her opening remarks. "And now," she concluded as I took my place beside her, "I'd like to officially welcome my sister and partner, Eliza Blackwell, who will present our vision for Blackwell Industries' next chapter." As I stepped forward, the grandfather clock struck. The hour, its resonant chime filling the modern boardroom with echoes of the past. I caught Vanessa's eye and saw in her expression the same recognition that had gradually emerged over our year of partnership, that our grandmother's final legacy wasn't just about redistributing power, but about reuniting 2 halves of a vision that had been unnecessarily divided. "Thank you," I began, addressing not just the room but the journey that had brought us here. 1 year ago, we stood at a crossroads. Today we move forward, not as competing visions, but as a unified force drawing strength from our differences. Grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm in the background, keeping perfect time, just as my grandmother had always known it would. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.